Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you. When I get rich, I'll become a cool banker and invite you all to the restaurant. Steve, an excellent student, the soul of the company and a shirt, Guy told his classmates. What's the occasion? Oliver, math teacher who had entered the room, grinned wickedly. I don't care what the occasion is, smiled Steve. The main thing is to become a banker. That's true, nodded the teacher, and looking at him slyly added, but I hope you remember what subject a future banker needs to know. That's right, Oliver, Steve said. For me personally, your subject is sacred. I believe that mathematics is deservedly considered the queen of sciences. Well, that's good to hear, smiled the mathematician, writing equations on the board. It's just a pity that not everyone understands it. Harry obviously disagrees with you. No, I agree, Harry said hastily, fearing that he would not be called to the blackboard. That's good, Oliver smiled even wider. Then please come to the board. We need to get these two equations straightened out. Harry stood up slowly and walked doomedly to the blackboard. The classmates, like Oliver, knew how it was going to end. To do away with equations. No, this was not Harry's student. This call to the board was no different from the previous ones. So, how are we doing? Oliver turned to the board. Harry was standing there with a dejected expression on his face, crumpling his chalk in his hands. What's the problem? The teacher asked curtly. Harry, have you not been studying again? No, I did, really, I did. The student rounded his eyes. It's just that I can't solve something. I can't get it right. What are you talking about? Oliver grinned. Sit down, my grief. Okay, we're going to go to the board. Steve. Steve went to the board and solved both equations in 5 minutes. There you go, Oliver said approvingly. Knowledge is power. And you, Harry, study the material more carefully next time, or you won't be able to solve it again. How do you see your future? That's different, Steve. He'll go far. He'll be a banker if he stays on the right path. And you, Harry, you'll be a factory nut at best. It's been a long time since then. By the way, Oliver was only half right. Steve really became a great banker and kept his promise, which either in jest or in earnest, gave his classmates when it was 15 years since graduation. Steve, pardon me, Steve invited his classmates to a restaurant owned by Harry. Yesterday's underachiever became an equally cool businessman. After high school, life scattered the class to different parts of the world. Some became successful. Others were content with the life of a simple, unremarkable representative of humanity. Most of the classmates communicated exclusively through social networks. As for Steve and Harry, their relationship became unexpectedly businesslike for both of them. Over time, mutually beneficial cooperation turned into a strong male friendship. It all began with the fact that the 2-year-old classmate came to the young banker for a loan for business development. Steve gave the former classmate a favorable loan. The restaurant business shot up and Harry knew how to be grateful. He made Steve good discounts on banquets and romantic dinners and the wake of his beloved grandmother, and it all cost the banker in a purely symbolic amount. The 15th anniversary of his graduation coincided with Steve's return from Canada, where he had worked for 2 years on a contract. 2 weeks after his return, friends organized a celebratory dinner at a restaurant. Harry provided the space and engaged musicians. Steve paid for the food and drinks. From the rest of the classmates, men did not take a penny. By the way, Oliver was one of the honored guests at that meeting of classmates. Well done, Harry, he praised his former student. It's all thanks to you, Harry replied with a smile. You've been pushing me in math, and this is the result. The old teacher laughed audibly, thinking the race was a bit of a mouthful. After all, Harry was getting in one ear and out the other. Still, Oliver was pleased. The boys hadn't forgotten the old mathematician, and that's worth a lot. "Steve, are you married?" Jessica, a beautiful but frivolous person, asked him. Back in high school, she had made eyes at Steve, but the guy seemed not to notice her flirtatious glances. Classmates danced a slow dance, and the banker suddenly felt that Jessica pressed against him a little tighter than the rules of propriety allow. Steve grinned faintly. Jessica had never been burdened with complexes. "No," he answered simply. "What's wrong?" Jessica asked with undisguised curiosity. "What's wrong?" smiled Steve. "You're not married either, as far as I know." "I'm waiting for my bestie," Jessica said, looking at him meaningfully. "Well, I'm waiting for my bestie, too." "And what is it, your most self?" asked the persistent woman. "How would I know?" Steve grinned. "I haven't met her yet. I'll meet her and I'll immediately realize." "Here she is." "I see," Jessica said disappointedly. "Well, good luck finding her." Banker Steve was a public figure in town. Apparently his bachelor status bothered almost all the single ladies. He was generally used to being approached by unencumbered women. Jessica was not the first and hardly the last. There were plenty of women who wanted to live in his beautiful and spacious country house. Some people in the business community made not very flattering assumptions about Steve, such as unconventional orientation or his love for women of advanced age. But the banker always despised and ignored gossip. Let them talk. "Did Jessica have a good time?" Harry asked with a chuckle as the door closed behind the last guest. Everyone was content to see each other, to enjoy some good food. There had been some mishaps, though. Frank got so drunk he fell off the stage. Fortunately, his classmate got off with a slight fright. The friends saw off the guests, listened to the words of gratitude, and then with a sense of accomplishment poured martinis into glasses and drank, snacking on olives. "Yes," the friend smiled. "You could say she was besieging me, all looking for a favorable party. She also hinted to me that we could be a perfect match." "Really? You're a married guy?" Steve wondered. "That was a year and a half ago," the classmate explained. "Isabella and I had just started dating. So Aunt Jessica tried to convince me that I couldn't find anyone better than her." "What does she do?" "She was in commercial real estate, as a sole proprietor, but 2 years ago her business failed." "That's it." Steve grinned understandingly. Nodded the restaurant owner, pouring a second one. "Jessica was used to living large, and now, as far as I understand, she's broke and looking for someone to improve her unenviable financial situation and intends to sell herself for more money." "That's the system." "Yeah," Steve said sarcastically. "I don't envy it." "No kidding. How did you get her off?" "You blew her off, didn't you?" "Well, let's just say I politely let her know that we weren't going to get along." He smiled. "Good for you." "Hey, Steve, why don't we get drunk?" Harry suggested it. "Oh, no. Some other time." The banker waved his hands. "I want to get a good night's sleep tomorrow. It's been a busy week." "It happens," Harry nodded. Steve lived in the country, and the cab ride, not counting the wait for the car, would take half an hour. And since it was Saturday, the wait could be longer. Steve looked at his watch and was surprised to find that it was not yet 7 o'clock. That's what it means to get a good night's sleep, the banker thought with satisfaction, and shuddered at the thought of what would happen if he accepted his friend's offer. Definitely nothing good. Steve briskly strode into the kitchen and made coffee. A cup of scalding, aromatic coffee and a walk in the woods was the morning program of a successful young banker's day off. Steve drank his coffee leisurely, rinsed his cup, and putting on a t-shirt, shorts and a light windbreaker, went for a walk. When Steve lived in Canada, he loved to go to the lakes and walk in the woods. Actually, it was from there that the banker brought his passion for morning walks. After such walks, his brain was charged for the week ahead, and the work was done. The man walked through the forest, breathing in the fragrant summer air with pleasure. He thought about the fact that Canada, of course, is a great country, But it was there that he realized how much he missed his native country. After the walk, Steve usually had breakfast, and then spent the whole day idling, accumulating additional strength for a hard work week. After about 40 minutes, the banker headed home in anticipation of a delicious, nutritious breakfast and quality rest. Suddenly, he heard moans. Listening, Steve realized that the sounds came from the side of the road to the village. A wounded animal, Steve thought. No, it doesn't sound like it. Steve quickened his step, and when he came out of the woods, he was stunned. There was a bloody woman lying by the roadside. Apparently, she had been hit by a car. The picture is clear, he summarized. Hit and run. What kind of people are these? Steve examined his pockets and cursed. His cell phone was at home, and he couldn't even call an ambulance. Help, the woman barely audibly whispered and passed out. The banker knew that a car accident victim should not be touched until the medics arrive. Any movement could only hurt her. Yes, but what to do if he didn't have a phone? There were few cars on Sunday morning, but after about 10 minutes, Steve managed to pull over a silver foreign car and ask for a phone. "What's wrong?" the owner asked, looking suspiciously at the woman lying there. And then Steve, quite unexpectedly, gave out. "My wife and I quarreled. She ran away from home. And here you see." "Yes, of course." The man nodded sympathetically and handed Steve a cell phone. "Wait," the dispatcher said in an impassive voice. The banker was worried, as if the stranger was really his wife. The poor woman gave no sign of life, and Steve wondered if she was alive. Taking a closer look at the woman, Steve noted that she was quite young and apparently pretty. What a subhuman, thought the banker again of the man who had run over the young woman. God forbid that all should be well. The ambulance doctor, after examining the woman, shook his head and voiced Steve's thoughts. What kind of people are these? They don't have a cross on them. What kind of people? The driver shrugged his shoulders. He was afraid to face the law and was gone. The woman was put on a stretcher, and the doctor said, addressing Steve, "You need to come with us too." He wanted to ask why, but remembering that he introduced himself as the husband of the victim, sat down in the car without complaint. Well, and why do I need it? I did my job, so why am I sitting here? Once again, thought Steve, sitting near the examination room. Tomorrow at work, Monday, as you know. Monday is a hard day, and anyway, what's he got to do with it? He tried to leave in English several times, but never did. And when Steve decided to flee, the doctor came out of the room. "Are you the spouse of the victim?" he asked. Steve wanted to say that he was not her husband, but just a passerby who couldn't pass by. But his tongue stuck to his mouth. "Well then," said the doctor, in a businesslike tone, "your wife's life is out of danger. Her spine is intact, but she has lost her memory." "Lost her memory?" Steve asked in amazement. Wow, he realized, of course, that the human body was a mechanism in which a great many different processes took place. But memory loss seemed to Steve something from the realm of television series. In his mind, no matter what soap opera, someone is bound to lose his memory. He himself was not fond of soap operas, but after hearing a couple of conversations between his mother and her friends, the banker made just such a conclusion. And now Steve was an unwitting witness to memory loss. "Yes," nodded the doctor, whose name, as the inscription on his badge said, was Alexander. "Your wife has retrograde amnesia. Forgive my ignorance, but could you explain what it is?" The doctor began to explain, juggling with abstruse medical terms, of which Steve didn't understand half. Actually, he understood only that the memory could be restored in a week or in several years. "Is there a cure?" Steve said confusedly. "Of course, we will try to speed up the process with the help of medications and perhaps hypnosis," Alexander replied. "But based on experience, I want to note that most often memory returns when a person is reminded of something about his past, or as a result of a strong shock." "Well, thank you for the information," the banker said thoughtfully. "And do I need it?" thought Steve again as he left the hospital. Dr. Alexander gave him an impressive list of medications and also said goodbye. "Don't forget to drop off your wife's paperwork tomorrow." Steve introduced the woman as Maria. It was the first name that came to his mind. The banker went to the reception desk and asked for a cab, once again asking himself the same question. When he got home, Steve went up to the second floor, which used to be the attic. It's nice here in the summer. It's cozy and, most importantly, not hot. He went out on the balcony and thoughtfully looked around. Not far from the village where the banker lived, there were scattered God-forsaken villages. Looking toward the forest, Steve sighed. But now another phrase came to his mind. We are responsible for those whom we have tamed. And Steve was also sure this young woman did not just appear in his life. Well, and with the documents somehow we'll sort it out. Summarize the banker. Veronica's life was difficult to call serene, but the woman did not think to complain about it. Moreover, in all the trials of life that fell to her share, Veronica saw a positive moment. Life hardships made her stronger, for which the woman was immensely grateful to them. 6 months ago, Veronica had a grief her only daughter, Maria, went missing, and the inconsolable mother was left with an 8-year-old granddaughter, Elizabeth. So, she had no right to be discouraged. After all, if something happened to her, and the girl will go straight to the orphanage. His only daughter, Veronica, gave birth out of wedlock and lived with her in the dormitory of the factory, in which she then worked as a secretary. The young mother came out of maternity leave and registered Maria in kindergarten. But the little girl began to be sick often. The management of the plant, to put it mildly, did not suit. They couldn't fire her for this, of course, but to force to dismiss at will quite well. Favor, sycophants, and intriguers, which the bosses, used in their own interests, was plenty. Veronica was accused of stealing, which she did not commit. Unfortunately, to prove otherwise, when the bosses are determined to dismiss, is simply unrealistic. Considering that you are a conscientious employee, we will not make a fuss, said the director, averting his sly little eyes. Well, you should, but I offer you 2 options: resignation or dismissal by article. The choice was obvious. So the young mother was left without a job and without a place to live. Veronica and her daughter returned to her native village and settled in a dilapidated shack she had inherited from her late parents. The only person who treated the young woman humanely was Beatty, an employee of the village council. This kind woman helped them to improve their living conditions, for which Veronica was eternally grateful to her. The specialist of the village administration helped them to get the house of a lonely old woman who died alone and had no heirs. In addition, Betty helped Veronica with her job. With the help of a kind woman, the young mother got a job at the school as a checkroom attendant and a janitor in one person. The villagers disliked Veronica and talked about her inappropriately, and when Maria grew up, the locals transferred this dislike to her. The girl was blossoming and getting better, outshining the rest of the village girls, and the locals whispered, she will go to study and bring her mother a bystruck. You can't get oranges from an aspen tree. Alas, their words were prophetic. Once, coming home for the weekend, Maria confessed to her mother that she was pregnant. To say that Veronica was upset was to say nothing, and she had dreamed that her daughter's life would be better than hers. But everything seems to be repeating itself. No, Veronica was not angry with her daughter. After all, a child, regardless of the circumstances of birth, is happiness. Nor did she get under Marie's skin with questions about the child's father. And so, everything is clear. Nothing will get through, Veronica said to her daughter. I lifted you up, and together we are strength. Maria nodded. But when she looked at her mother, Veronica's heart squeezed painfully. It was the look of a beaten dog. No wonder she'd get whipped. But that was half the problem. Maria had to study. Of course, no one canceled the sabbatical, but she had only a year to study. So the defense of the long-awaited diploma of psychologist postponed for a year or 2. Elizabeth was born healthy and as beautiful as her mother. The times when single mothers were cast oblique glances long ago and safely past, but apparently not for everyone. At least not for young, but ugly, obese married ladies. Oh yes. No chance. Maria will encroach on their two-legged happiness, which she does not need gift. Meanwhile, Maria had completely different concerns. She did not take a leave of absence and transferred to the correspondence department. That's right, agreed her mother. What to lose a year or even 2? Well, and 2 sessions will somehow survive. I'll take time off, sit with Elizabeth while you will be at the session. After the defense of the diploma, it was necessary to think about employment, and as soon as possible. Veronica's penny, salary, and childcare allowance were barely enough for the essentials. Would you like to be a psychologist at our school? Asked Betty, now a pensioner who was a frequent visitor to Veronica's house. The prospect of working as a psychologist in her native school did not entice the university graduate, and not because this option was far from prestigious. She would not fit into the team. They'll survive. No, Aunt Betty, I don't want to. Shook her head. Our financial situation, of course, leaves much to be desired. But no, you understand? Betty did understand. She just wanted to help these people who were almost family. I'll try to get a job in town, Maria said. But it wasn't so easy. Most employers, when they heard that she lived in the village, made frightened eyes. How will you get there? By bus, Maria shrugged. But apparently this argument did not seem too convincing to them. Lack of work experience and a small child also did not contribute to successful employment. However, the young mother did not think to be discouraged. All this is temporary, she said. Sooner or later something will turn up. And she was right. After a couple of months of struggling, Maria managed to get a job at the Center for Psychological Assistance to Children and Adolescents. Years went by. Life went on as usual and seemed to be getting better. However, fate continued to test Veronica's family strength. One day, Maria did not return from work. That day, she called her mother and warned that she had a lot of work, so she would come by cab. Veronica called her daughter several times, but she did not answer. Why doesn't Mom answer? Elizaveta asked through tears. Mom has just a lot of work, she said, trying her best to smile. Answered her grandmother. Go to sleep, kitten. Until Mommy comes, I won't lie down, the girl said, and sobbed even more. Veronica was sure something had happened to her daughter. The woman pressed the trembling granddaughter to herself, and when she, sobbing, fell asleep, sighed with relief. But what will happen tomorrow? Veronica went to the police as if to work. The employees were looking for her. The poor woman only nodded doubtfully, but one day she couldn't stand it. I'd like to know how you're looking for her. After all, Maria is not a needle, and still there. Don't yell at me, the policeman exclaimed indignantly. We have dozens of them besides your Maria. Maybe your Maria has taken a stroll and you are worried. You should have brought up your daughter better. How dare you? A woman graying with grief shook her head. I dare, said the police officer. Unfortunately, we have a carload and a small cart of such cases. And, softened, added, I understand your grief, but you also understand us. We are doing our best, but so far, alas, I see with a sigh, said Veronica, and went out thinking that now she will come home, and there Elizabeth. The girl is so hopeful that her mom will be found. Posts on social networks, except for comments from sympathetic citizens, did not yield any results. The fellow villagers had their own opinion on the matter. She left for a beautiful life and did not return. Neighbors maligned. And she didn't spare her little one. I guess she's already serving daddies with fat wallets somewhere abroad. You should be ashamed of yourselves, Betty reprimanded them. A man's in grief, and all you want to do is scratch your tongues. Is that all you can think of? The kind woman supported Veronica and Elizabeth as best she could, but it wasn't enough. A month passed and Maria never showed up. In her mind, Veronica accepted that something terrible had happened to Maria. Something very, very bad. But her maternal heart refused to accept it. Elizabeth withdrew into herself. She sat silent for long periods of time, staring out of the window. Mother is waiting, Veronica thought with a sigh. The poor woman was not the least bit relieved, but she had to be strong. Besides, one had to survive. It was hard to survive on the salary of a janitorial checkroom attendant, not to mention living with a child. Veronica occasionally looked through the newspapers for vacancies. She was ready to take any job, even the dirtiest one with a miserable salary, but rejection followed rejection. An old woman from the countryside was not the most attractive candidate. Terrible. Betty shook her head. Veronica, why don't you start selling, say, pies? And in August you'll pick tomatoes and cucumbers and start selling them too. Otherwise, you'll be lost. And so kopecheka to kopecheka. Veronica thought about it. Why? It's a very good idea. Her piroshki, bilyashi, sausages and dough, and other baked goods are excellent. Tomato and cucumber harvest, too, God willing. Angry neighbors, even. There were times whispered that this witch scares away weeds, so she grows everything. Veronica laughed. So be it. Less tongue-tied will be less. Or else, just in case, I'll deprive them all of the gift of speech. Business went unexpectedly well. Veronica baked pies and other goodies, and Betty and her husband delivered them to cafes and diners on their old 10. There was enough work, and the grandmother and granddaughter were fed, clothed and clothed. Having gathered an impressive harvest in August, Veronica, with the help of Betty and her granddaughter, rolled up about 50 different caliber jars of cucumbers, tomatoes, assorted and patisans. Our company is thriving, Elizabeth said proudly. Veronica smiled and sighed furtively. She realized that her granddaughter was trying to hold on, but only the grandmother and the pillow knew how many tears this little girl had shed. It's hard to lose a mother at any age. And if you're only 8 years old. A few days before the new year, Elizabeth said, tomorrow I'm coming with you. Veronica planned to sell pickles on the highway. What are you doing there? The old woman asked in surprise. And if you get bored there? Stay at home with Aunt Betty. I won't get bored, the girl said stubbornly. I want to go with you. Oh, please. I'll stay out of your way. I'll be quiet. Veronica thought about it. Actually, it wasn't too cold outside. The place near the covered bus stop was quite busy and popular, mostly with single truckers who wanted to buy home. The buses to the village ran well, and if Elizaveta got bored, Veronica could send her home safely. And Betty, if anything, and will meet and look after and help to melt the stove. All right, agreed, answered her grandmother with a smile, and Elizaveta, giving a triumphant cry, went to dress. You have a helper today, I see, smiled Anna, an elderly, burly woman from the neighboring village. She was selling homemade lard. Today, in addition to the lard, she had 3 goose carcasses. Yes, smiled Veronica. Well, good assistant nodded approvingly and turned to the girl. What's your name, beautiful girl? Elizaveta, she answered importantly. Well, and me, Baba Anna. Let's get acquainted. Here, take this candy. He did, so to speak, for getting acquainted. Thank you, Elizabeth nodded politely. The trade was going well. The main clientele were dacha owners who planned to celebrate the new year in the country. The first customer was a man in his 50s. He bought from Veronica 3 2-liter jars of cucumber and tomato assortment, after which he approached a neighbor. He bought a good piece of lard, a goose, and, encouraged by the words of the women, eat with pleasure, drove off in the direction of the city. 15 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. A young man of about 25 and a lady of about 40 with a tail wearing a mink coat and red lacquered boots, got out of the car. "How much are the geese?" he asked Anna cheerfully. 700 rubles, smiled the peddler. "Archie," the lady exclaimed in horror, "don't tell me you're going to eat it." "You got it absolutely right," confirmed the guy. "I'll bake it with apples with a ready crust, Mama, nice. Or would you rather have it in beer?" "That's a good one." "My son has to eat right," the woman retorted. "Mom, calm down. This is the right diet," the guy said admonishingly, and, ignoring the indignant look of his loving mother, took money out of his wallet. "It's all cholesterol," the woman persisted. "Yes, and very tasty cholesterol." Archie waved his hands and, wishing the women a happy new year, walked to the car. The buyer's mother said something about not caring about health and position in society. He objected cheerfully, and then the SUV started and drove off into the countryside, most likely to a dacha village where rich people lived. The women laughed merrily. "Yes, I don't envy this lover of good food." Anna laughed through her tears. "I suppose his mother gives him steamed cutlets and stewed vegetables." "That's right." Veronica picked up on it, and without salt, the old businesswomen laughed again. Today they had worked hard. By lunchtime, all the goods were sold, and Anna called her son-in-law to pick her up. He arrived about 20 minutes later, and the women warmly said goodbye and congratulated each other, on the coming holiday. "Baba, I want to eat," Elizabeth whimpered. All the food supplies had been eaten, and the bus was delayed. Besides, suddenly there was a strong wind. "Is there a snowstorm coming?" Veronica was worried. The bus was still not coming, and the elderly woman called the dispatcher's office, where she was told that the bus was delayed. A few minutes later, something unimaginable began. It seemed that the snowstorm, which despite Veronica's fears still played out, would now pick them up and carry them away for faraway lands. The woman liked what was happening less and less. "Let's go beyond the stop. It's not so snowy there," she said to the crying Elizaveta, thinking at the same time, "What an old fool." Well, why the devil did she bring the child with her? And just they took a step beyond the stop, as a truck rushed past them, and Veronica, not keeping her balance, flew into the ditch. Elizabeth was stunned and then screamed as loud as she could, "Grandma, Now grandmother barely audibly moaned, writhing in pain, though she wanted to howl. But she couldn't scare the child. "Now, dearie, I'll come up and—" Veronica fainted. When Elizabeth saw that her grandmother had suddenly closed her eyes, she sobbed out loud. "Grandma, no!" she cried. And cars were passing by, and none of them cared about the crying girl. At first, Elizaveta wanted to go down to her grandmother, but realized that the two of them could not get up. It would be better to ask someone for help. The girl went out onto the road and frantically waved her arms. "Help!" Elizabeth shouted tearfully, smearing tears on her face. She was very scared, and the cars kept coming and coming. "Is there a problem, young lady?" asked a young, richly dressed man who got out of a glossy black car. "Any help needed?" Steve did a lot of charity work. Right now, he was on his way back from a New Year's Eve party for orphanage children. The sponsor of the party was his bank, and Mr. Steve came to the tree to get a legitimate portion of applause and gratitude. To tell the truth, he never liked to show off. Yes, Steve drove an expensive car and wore brand-name clothes, but he knew he had earned it all through hard work. Unlike unnecessary in general praise in public, Steve sincerely believed that good deeds should be done in silence. Although, of course, if the management of orphanages are pleased to thank him in this way, publicly and pompously, well, it's their right. Everything is better than mercantile ladies desperately trying to marry a young banker. Remembering the hunters for his money, Steve grinned. That was it. There was nothing more for them. That June morning changed his life dramatically. The day after the accident victim arrived at the hospital with Steve, he went there again. The banker brought all the necessary medications and asked how she was. "No change," Alexander replied. "I think you'll be able to visit your wife in a day or two." The words "visit your wife," although they sounded unusual to the ear of a 32-year-old bachelor, unexpectedly liked Steve. When he realized this, he was very surprised. Maybe it's a sign that it's really time for me to get married. After all around say so. Ironically, thought the banker. With documents was more difficult, but Steve told the doctor that he found no passport or policy. Apparently, Maria left the house with the documents. He guiltily waved his hands. "But when I found her, she didn't have her purse. So you know what I mean?" "Yes, but then—" Dr. Alexander made a meaningful pause, and Steve understood him perfectly. "How much?" he asked. "There on the wall is a price list of paid services," Alexander replied. Steve nodded and, after studying the cost of the services, turned back to the doctor. He pulled out his wallet, took out 2 $5,000 bills, and slipped them into the pocket of the doctor's coat. "Payment for services at the registrar's office," Alexander said, a little embarrassed. "Thank you for the information," smiled the banker. "I will pay now, and this money is my gift to you." "I'm well, thank you. But you may want to move your wife to a private clinic. Usually people in your line of work—" "I don't know what people in our circle do, but somehow I trust you," Dr. Steve interrupted cheerfully, "and I hope you'll justify my trust." "I'll do my best," Alexander replied with dignity. On the 3rd day of his spouse's stay in the hospital, Steve visited her. On the way, he bought fruit, a bottle of fresh juice from his favorite restaurant, and wilty roses. Approaching the hospital, the banker realized that he was worried. Just like before a first date, he cheered up and thought that was essentially what it was. When Steve entered the room, a young woman was half sitting on a cushion and looking straight ahead. The patient raised her large and serious brown eyes to Steve, and the banker realized he was missing. "Why, she's not just pretty," marveled Steve. "She's a real beauty, and no pouty lips and those creepy eyebrows halfway down her forehead." By the way, the eyebrows, like the eyes, struck the man in the heart, dark parted, beautifully shaped. The brown hair of the beautiful stranger was gathered in a careless knot, but Steve had no doubt that it was beautiful, or was that what he wanted to think? After examining his charge, Steve opened his mouth to ask how she was feeling, but the young woman beat him to it. "Are you my husband?" she asked quietly and hesitantly, crumpling the corner of the blanket. "That's not really true," Steve replied softly. He had no desire to lie to a man who was in a helpless state. Besides, the banker no longer doubted for a moment that he had fallen in love like a boy. So he mentally stated with great regret that he could not do without a certain amount of lying. "All right, we'll figure it out," Steve decided lightly, unable to take his eyes off the sick woman. "Not really?" She raised an eyebrow, and Steve mentally groaned. At this moment, Maria, as he introduced her to the doctor, was just unrealistically beautiful. Then what would happen when the bruises and abrasions came off that pretty face? "I'll probably go crazy with love," Steve thought with a chuckle. So much for the one and only. Steve wasn't really amused. To think that for once he was in love. Except the circumstances weren't exactly ideal, to say the least. "Hush, hush," the banker soothed his conscience. "I will definitely confess everything. Now for me, the task number 1 to create for Maria the most comfortable conditions. By the way, I wonder what her name is really." The young woman stared at him, and Steve remembered that she was waiting for an answer. "Yes, not really," he confirmed. "It's just that you and I were just about to get married." "I see," Maria nodded, and Steve thought, "It's not easy to lie to my eyes. At least for me." "Come on." Again the man began to reason with his conscience. No one has ever abolished lying for salvation. And oh, miracle. My conscience was soothed. "I was told my name was Maria," she said. And you? It's funny, of course, to meet your future husband. And the beauty laughed her melodious laugh. Yes, it is funny indeed, he agreed. But it's normal in our case, isn't it? Yes, I guess so. So what's your name? I'm Steve, the banker replied and smiled slyly. And it's a pleasure to meet you. You too, Maria said. And her voice sounded sincere. Unless, of course, Steve was wishful thinking. But apparently not. The young woman looked at him sympathetically and incidentally, not without interest. He knew that woman's look. And the flowers are very pretty, she added with a smile. I tried, Steve replied with genuine tenderness in his voice, and thought he would do it as often as possible. Lying is disgusting, but he would try to win this beauty over. And who knows, maybe the matter will really end in a wedding. 2 weeks later, Steve took Maria home. At first, he planned to make her a fake passport. The money and connections allowed him to do it. But then the banker abandoned the idea. It was one thing to lie to the doctor that he and Maria were married. Otherwise, Steve wouldn't have been allowed to see her. But to slip a fake passport to a man whose memory is like a blank slate is a real pig. Steve told the doctor that it would take at least a month to restore the documents, and he only nodded understandingly. 2 weeks passed, and, except for the loss of memory, the young woman felt quite tolerable. So Alexander decided that she could be discharged, and it turned out that in the end the doctor turned a blind eye to the lack of documents, for which he received a good sum at discharge. On the eve of discharge day, Steve called his friend Harry. So, tell me, where does your Isabel address? Harry was in the know, so his classmate's question didn't surprise him. I never realized you were such an adventurer, Harry remarked when the banker told him of his intentions. I didn't think so myself, Steve admitted, and then his friend handed the phone to his wife. Isabella listed her favorite ladies' stores, and the banker, thanking her, went shopping. The salesgirls looked curiously at the man, in whom they recognized the owner of the bank, but did not say anything. But Steve was a sharpshooter. The banker knew exactly. These clever bitches with model looks are probably wondering for whom the famous banker buys all this closet. He quite admitted that not today. So tomorrow, the report from the shopping will excite the city. Oh, the internet. Steve had bought everything needed for a complete ladies' closet from lingerie to outerwear. Thank God I'm not tight on funds, he thought. Otherwise, how would I get by? On the day of the discharge, Steve bought Marie a beautiful dress, shoes, a luxurious basket of roses, and gently putting her in the car, said, "Shall we go home?" She only nodded with a smile. In those 2 weeks, Steve and Maria, or who was she, had become very attached to each other. All the patients were jealous of this beautiful brunette with the shy smile. One could only dream of Steve's reverence for her. I wonder how they would react if they knew the truth. The banker had asked himself that question more than once. What did he care about some strange women, though? But the question of how the lady of his heart would feel about this lie really did not give Steve peace. And although he repeatedly entered into dialogues with his conscience, trying to convince her that there will be a day there will be food, on Steve's soul was sticky and dirty residue. But, one way or another, Maria had to be taken to his house. Where would he take her? Steve couldn't help but realize that Maria's relatives might be looking for her. So one evening he took a picture of the young woman and posted a post on social networks. However, the result was zero. One single user left a comment that not so long ago someone was looking for a similar girl, and that was it. Then Steve had no time to post. He was busy at work. And when he remembered about it again, he reasonably decided that the relatives of his ward, if any, could do something about it themselves. Hiring a nurse was not an option. Maria served herself and did not go beyond the territory. "What if I get lost?" she said with a laugh. "Then I promise to walk you around the village every day," solemnly swore Steve. "I assure you there is much to see here." And they walked, swimming in the lake, picking flowers, berries, and then mushrooms. It was really great. but the lies poisoned all the joy. Maria felt quite well. The only thing that bothered the young woman was periodic attacks of headache. But Alexander prescribed pills for that. All that remained was to wait. But for what? Marital relations were out of the question. Spouses slept in separate bedrooms, although to hide it there were some playful thoughts. You're not a monk, and when the house walks such a beauty with a seductive figure, it is difficult to think only about nature and the weather. There are probably men out there who would take advantage of the situation, but because Steve was a decent man, this did not happen. He decided at once, if it does happen, it'll be fair. It would be a good idea to get to know each other better first. But it's easy to say, get to know each other better first. But it's easy to say, get to know each other. A person who is faced with the loss of a relative's memory will have to, shall we say, familiarize him with himself. But after all, Steve himself knew nothing about the young woman he had given the name Maria. Yes, the situation, he thought. If someone had told me under what circumstances I would meet my love, I would never have believed it. In the meantime, Steve was being bombarded with questions. Where and how did we meet? Do we have kids? Have we lived here long? And so on. Steve felt like his brain was about to explode. When Maria asked him to tell the story of how they met, he mumbled something like, just an ordinary college party. We liked each other, so where did we go to school? The young woman asked, looking at Steve inquisitively with her beautiful eyes. Good question, grinned Steve mentally. Well, it's all clear with me, but where did she study? The Institute of Commerce and Law. He named the school he had graduated from. Yes? Maria asked with surprise and thought deeply. And Steve thought, that would be funny. If she graduated from some Sharashkanoi office, and I attributed to her a prestigious university. Steve suddenly remembered what Maria was wearing when he discovered her. She was wearing a summer business suit. This suggested that Maria worked for a decent organization that accepted people with a college degree. Well, or at least graduates of technical schools. So, a Sharashkan office could be safely dismissed. When Alexander gave Steve this outfit, the banker did not hesitate to burn it. The suit was torn, blood-stained, and unwearable. So maybe you shouldn't have done it, Harry snorted. What if your beautiful stranger had seen it and remembered what had happened to her and who she was? Steve slammed his fist on his forehead. What an idiot, he exclaimed. That's right, isn't it? But on the other hand, is it worth scaring her? Also true. One day, Steve woke up to a mind-blowing odor. It smelled of coffee and something else distinctly meaty. The intrigued banker sharply threw off the blanket and went to the kitchen, where he saw a rather nice picture. Maria, dressed in a light olive-colored silk robe, which went surprisingly well with her dark eyes and hair, was frying pancakes. Some of the pancakes, filled with chopped chicken and mushrooms, were laid out on a platter. Emma, what wonderful flavors, Steve said excitedly. Can I try some? Of course, smiled Maria. Do you want it with sour cream? Yes, he nodded, pouring himself some orange juice. And she's a very decent cook, thought the banker. Steve was pleasantly surprised. Pretty, slim, economical, and she seemed to have a good character. We should take her. Do you like her? The ward asked. Very much. With a satisfied smile, Steve replied, reaching out for another pancake. Did I often make pancakes? Often, said Steve laconically, hoping that would be the case. Steve sighed, Maria said, and the banker realized there was another batch of questions to come. Yes? Trying to sound carefree, he said. What did his ward have in store for him this time? Steve, do we have any pictures of us together? That's why I'm asking. Maybe if I saw them, I'd remember everything. Well, it's unbearable to live without knowing who I am, Maria finished pathetically. Steve sighed. Here we go again. What's so strange about it, though? It's a predictable question. And if you think about it, it's strange that she didn't ask it right away. But when your head's a mess, it's really hard to think straight. You see, Maria? Steve said slowly, thinking up an explanation as he went along. The photo albums were lost when I moved into this house. Sure, I had a lot of photos on my smartphone, but I lost it not too long ago. And when I bought a new one, we somehow didn't take pictures. I had a lot of work to do. I see, but I promised to make up for it. You and I will definitely be photographed together, smiled Steve, and looking at the clock added, and now I have to go to work. Thanks for breakfast. It was delicious. Got away with it, Steve thought, starting up Zinfinity. Once again, Maria's memory was stubbornly unwilling to recover, and Steve had mixed feelings about it. On the one hand, the young banker was used to the company of a mysterious, beautiful stranger, and if Maria remembered who she was and where she came from, she would return to her former life. But what about him? On the other hand, he wished this story would end soon, but Steve was afraid to imagine what the outcome would be. Wouldn't he be accused of holding the man down? True, Maria's relatives never showed up, but who knows what was wrong? Maybe they hadn't seen his post? Steve envisioned the bold headlines in the media and on the internet. Banker Steve held woman down. Thinking about it, Steve hummed cheerfully. That's how they lived. Maria cooked delicious breakfasts, lunches, and dinners. Steve worked and pleased his beloved with bouquets of flowers and arranged shopping for her. From time to time, the ward would ask him questions, and Steve would come up with answers. A few months later, Marie had a dream. The young woman dreamed that she was holding a baby in her arms. Waking up at 4 o'clock in the morning, Maria made her way determinedly to Steve's room. Maria, he was surprised. Is something wrong? Are you sick? Steve, tell me, did we have a child? Persistently asked the ward. A baby? What baby? I had a dream that I was holding a baby in my arms. Oh, a dream. Steve was relieved. Well, it was just a dream. I mean, how many dreams can you... Yes, I understand, Maria said excitedly. But, you know, it was like it was real. And it's like my brain cleared up. Steve, I think I'm starting to remember. The banker's heart started to race. Well, that's it. Now Maria's going to say he's been lying to her and she wants nothing to do with Steve. What did you remember? He asked breathlessly. I remembered that my name was really Maria, the young woman said with a smile in her voice. And it was real. Well, that's interesting. So Steve, spontaneously thinking up a name for her, had hit the nail on the head. It's hardly a figment of his ward's imagination. Dr. Alexander explained that during the process of memory retrieval, a person remembers everything that actually happened. So, is it the child too? Not a fact, the banker pondered. She remembered her name in reality, and the child was a dream. But one way or another, it must be finished. What if we hire a private detective? Struck the young banker, and he wondered how this simple thought had not occurred to him at once. Done. In the morning, Steve had to go to the New Year's party for the children of the orphanage. Then he would confess everything to Maria, apologize, and find a private detective. Steve looked at his ward. Maria was sleeping sweetly, sniffling like a little girl, and looked incredibly touching. No, he couldn't let go of this amazing girl so easily. We'll be together, vowed Steve. Whatever it takes. What a weather, Evan, the banker's driver, muttered in a disgruntled voice. It was so calm in the morning, and now the windshield wipers were failing, and the ice chips were hitting the windshield audibly. Steve was tuning in for difficult conversation with Maria, and was very nervous. And then there was the snowstorm, which had played out so inconveniently. After a couple of kilometers, the men groaned. Right on the roadway stood a little girl, and desperately waved her hands. Where had she come from? Evan, slow down, Steve said, though he didn't need to. The driver was already slowing down. The men jumped out of the car, and the banker asked if the girl needed help. There the little girl sobbed, pointing toward the ditch. My grandmother. She's sick. Evan and Steve didn't waste time talking. The banker put the little girl in the car and they ran to the ditch. Once down, the men found an elderly woman. She was unconscious. The driver touched her pulse and, convinced that the woman was alive, picked her up in his arms and carried her to the car. "Grandmother!" cried the little girl on a burst of tears. Poor grandmother. In the warm car, Veronica regained consciousness and moaned. "What's the matter with you?" Steve asked. "My leg," whispered the old woman, and tears came to her eyes. She could have broken her leg, thought the banker, considering what to do. If he called an ambulance, he did not know when it would arrive. "In this blizzard, we'll take you to the hospital now," Steve said softly. "No," the older woman shook her head. "I can't go to the hospital. But you could have a fracture, Elizavetochka." "There's no one to leave her with," she said faintly. "Babs, I can and alone," assured the granddaughter. "Or at Aunt Ira's I'll spend the night. But what if something serious? Here's what, ladies." Steve made a decision. "Now we'll take you to the hospital, and I can take the girl with me. Don't worry, I don't mean any harm." The grandmother and granddaughter hesitantly looked at each other, and Evan said with a smile, "Steve is a kind-hearted man. We're going to be waiting a long time for an ambulance." "Well, if it's not too much trouble," Veronica said quietly, thinking that the world is not without good people. The snowstorm was slowly but surely subsiding, so they reached the city quite quickly. When they arrived at the trauma center, Steve felt a sense of déjà vu. Despite the tragedy of the situation, the man grinned mentally. He seemed to be making a habit of picking people up on the road. "Steve, you idiot," he berated himself for making such stupid jokes. Seeing a modestly dressed woman getting out of a premium car, accompanied by a distinguished gentleman, the doctor was surprised. However, recognizing the respectable man as an old acquaintance, Alexander was glad to see him as his own. Maybe he would give him some more money. "What are you doing here?" he asked, shaking the banker's hand. "I brought my grandmother," Steve explained. "Picked her up on the highway. She may have broken her leg." "Well, we'll see. Let me know what's wrong with her." "Okay," the surprised doctor shrugged his shoulders and disappeared into the examination room. After about 20 minutes, Alexander came out and said, "Grandma's leg is indeed broken. Fortunately, the fracture is uncomplicated. Can I take her away?" "No," Alexander shook his head. "We'll leave Grandma for a week." "I see," nodded the banker. "Maybe you need something? Some medicine or something?" "No. The hospital has everything we need. Maybe some vitamins, calcium to strengthen the bones, or cottage cheese, dairy, fish." "Got it." The doctor was completely confused. Is he going to buy food and medicine for a strange granny? Alexander thought, perplexed. "There's nowhere to put the money. Then I'll go to the store." Steve confirmed his assumptions. After picking up a full bag of fruit, yogurt, cottage cheese, a large box of juice, and a couple of chicken breasts in the supermarket, the banker took the products to the hospital and they rolled back. "Let's go to my place," Steve said cheerfully to the little passenger. Elizabeth nodded importantly. The girl felt that this rich uncle on a beautiful car is a good and kind man. "And what do you do?" Daring asked Elizabeth. "I am a banker," smiled Steve. "Banker." With respect, stretched out the girl and simply asked, "You must be rich." Rich, he did not hide the obvious. "Great," Elizabeth said approvingly. "I think so too," laughed the banker. The roads were thoroughly snowed over, and there was a long traffic jam on the way out of town. I should call Maria, Steve thought, and took out his cell phone and dialed her number. "Don't worry, it's just a traffic jam," he said. "Maria, I'm not alone tonight. No, it's not friends or partners. You'll see later. Sure, get some sleep. You'll feel better. It's probably from the sudden change of weather." The banker added one last thing. "Whatever you say, darling. Kisses." "Is this your wife?" Elizabeth asked in a businesslike manner. Well, you could say that, Steve sighed. Why can you say that? The girl asked, giving Steve a piercing look. At that moment, Elizabeth reminded him of someone. But who? How can I explain it to you? He answered, thinking that an affirmative answer would have been enough. Now you explain. It's just that we live together, but not officially signed, Steve said, and the girl nodded thoughtfully. I see you have a civil marriage. Well, in general, yes, summarized the banker. Steve and his little guest arrived in the village in the evening. Wow, what a beautiful house, exclaimed Elizabeth when they drove up to Steve's mansion. I'm glad you like it, smiled the owner of the house. Come on in, don't be shy. And where is your wife? Asked the girl. My wife is not feeling well right now, but when she sleeps, she will feel better, and she will definitely join us. Is your wife pretty? Very beautiful, smiled the banker. For me, she is the most beautiful. You are a lucky man, summarized the girl. I think so too, laughed the man. But you know what would make me even happier? What? Elizabeth asked with interest. A delicious and nutritious dinner. I don't know about you, but I'm starving. Are you? I am, the little guest admitted maturely. Steve heated up a soup with mixed vegetables and beefsteak from Harry's restaurant. They were accompanied by rice and spaghetti. The hospitable host asked Elizabeth what she would eat the steaks with, and the girl opted for spaghetti. Great, Steve said. I'll heat up the spaghetti now. In the meantime, we'll have soup. It's perfect for the cold weather. While the guest appetizingly nibbled on vegetable soup, the banker looked at her with curiosity. He liked the girl, so pretty and smart. Suddenly, Steve thought that he could have a daughter of the same age, or a son. Elizabeth, how old are you? Steve asked. 8. And I'm 32. 24 is a normal age to be a father. And my parents keep asking me when I'm going to give them grandchildren. God, what's going through my head? Uncle Steve, how did you become a banker? Elizabeth suddenly asked him, and he almost choked. What can I say? An unexpected question for an 8-year-old girl. The numbskull is already 10, so he seems to be interested in nothing but computer games. Well, I wanted to be a banker for starters, Steve chuckled. 6th grade. I was told I could change my mind 100 times before I graduated, but no. And after school, I went to the Institute of Commerce and Law. Then I worked in a solid company, took advanced training courses, and as a consequence, started my own business. Elizabeth listened attentively, looking at the banker with respect. And when Steve stopped talking, she asked, Are there any female bankers? Yes. Inquisitive got, thought Steve, and replied, Well, why not? Elizabeth, I'll tell you this. It's not gender that matters, it's responsibility. Irresponsible people have nothing to do in the financial sphere. And of course, the desire to constantly learn and develop. During the conversation, they did not notice how Maria entered the kitchen. Something I'm not good today, she said faintly, and greeted the little guest with a smile. Hello. Let's get acquainted. My name is Maria. Elizabeth looked at the woman who entered with all her eyes. The girl looked at Maria as if she recognized someone in her, but she was not sure that she was not mistaken. What happened next left Steve completely stunned. Mom, his young guest whispered in shock and rushed to Maria without hesitation. All day Maria had not been feeling well. She had a headache, but on top of that, the young woman was somehow uncomfortable. Then there was that dream about the baby. After Steve's call, she felt a little better. Maria looked out the window and looked out at the snowy surroundings and realized why she felt uneasy. The young woman was certain. She had a child, or even had one. But then where was it now? And most importantly, why was Steve hiding it? And maybe something happened to our child, and that's why I lost my memory. Frowning, Maria thought. And Steve does not tell me anything because he is afraid for my psyche. But my memory will come back sooner or later. Her head didn't hurt anymore, but she felt physically heavy from thinking. The young woman fell asleep as she usually did after taking the medicine the doctor had prescribed. She lay in bed and instantly fell asleep. Through her sleep, Maria heard a car pull up, and after a while, she heard the voice of Steve and a little girl. Hearing the child's voice, Maria thought she was hallucinating. The voice of the child, most likely a girl, seemed vaguely familiar to Maria. For whatever reason, the child's voice only made her more certain that the child was not just a dream or a figment of her imagination distorted by memory loss. As Maria descended the stairs, the child's voice became more and more distinct. Her head suddenly felt treacherously dizzy. She leaned on the railing, and when it was gone, she walked on. Maria was already in the kitchen. The girl sat at the table across from Steve and munched on her soup. What a pretty little girl, thought Maria, and a powerful wave of tenderness suddenly came over her. The guest was dark-haired and brown-eyed like herself. But where had this little girl come from? The young woman greeted the little girl warmly, and she looked at Maria with a look that made her heart sink. And before Maria knew it, the girl had called her mommy. She said it in a whisper, but Maria's voice seemed like the sound of thunder. Before the eyes of the young woman appeared some vague fragments of memories. Here was Maria holding the newborn girl, swaddling her and whispering some tender words. The village, angry and jealous, gossipy neighbors, and this girl who was now sitting at the table with her husband. But now the young woman remembered quite clearly that she had never been married. But then why had Steve called himself her husband? Maria remembered a car coming at her, and she didn't have time to run aside. The next thing she knew, it was total darkness. But before plunging into that darkness, the young woman was rushing home from town to this very girl who was her daughter Elizabeth, and to her mother, whose name was Veronica. Maria's memory unraveled like a ball of thread. She remembered and remembered, and Elizabeth clung to her and, laughing or crying, said, "Mommy, my beloved Mommy, I knew that you were alive and that you had not abandoned me." Maria cried too. But Steve was relieved to see that they were tears of happiness. She stroked her daughter's head and said, "Of course I didn't leave you, my doll, my favorite bunny." Mary kissed her daughter's face, and from time to time, laughing through her tears, looked into her eyes and could not look at her. Elizabeth's hair was wet with her mother's tears. The banker looked at them with all his eyes and thought, "Is it really so?" Banker had laughed at his mother more than once when she had assured him that the plots for TV shows were taken from life. Well, now he was ready to take it back. God, how touching it all looked. By the way, what a story for a TV show. Maria was in such euphoria from the meeting with her daughter that she did not immediately remember about the essentials. For example, the fact that for 6 months she has been in the house of a stranger. Maria remembered that Steve had brought her here from the hospital. But why? The young woman already knew that the purse with her phone and passport were not with her. Perhaps the bag had flown off to the side, or the person who hit her decided to make a profit. Alas, it happens. So there really wasn't much to go on. Besides, Maria had lost her memory and couldn't tell us anything about herself. But maybe this man was still looking for Maria's relatives, and he managed to do it only now. It seems all logical, but something prevented to fully accept this version. All later. Smiling through tears, thought the happy woman. Now the main thing is that my Elizabeth, my sweet girl, is now with me. And what about Mom? "Elizabeth," Maria called out to her daughter. "Mom," sleepily muttered the little girl, dozing on her mother's lap. "Are you asleep?" Her mother laughed softly, stroking her fragile body.
Happily smiling, replied daughter. "I'm not surprised," Steve said. "She is cold, poor thing, and so many impressions in one day, by the way. How did you find each other?"
Maria asked. "And where is Mom?" Elizabeth, where's Grandma? She, of course, was happy to meet her daughter, but she wanted to dot all the I's, Mom, Grandma is in the hospital, sleepily replied her daughter. In the hospital? What about her? Maria was scared. Calm down, Mom. Everything is already fine, smiled Elizabeth. It was all Uncle Steve and Evan. They saved her. Saved her? Maria marveled. Saved her from what? She knew perfectly well that Evan was the driver of the consort. But what kind of trouble had her mother and daughter gotten into that they had to be rescued? So many questions. Steve shook his head. Well, we do have a lot to talk about, but why don't we put Elizabeth to bed first? The baby is blowing her nose, by the way. Yes, of course, nodded the young woman. I want to sleep with Mommy, said the girl. Can I? Well, of course you can, Steve and Maria replied in unison. Don't worry, I'm only here for one night, and then you will sleep together again. I understand. Maria blushed, and Banker laughed. I wonder what you understand, Steve asked. Well, if you are going to be married, you must sleep together, Elizabeth explained, showing her perplexity. Well, of course you do. Well, of course you do. Grown people, and they don't understand such obvious things. O times, O mores, said the banker cheerfully. Maria, I am waiting for you in the parlor. When Maria, having put her daughter to bed, came down to the living room, Steve was savoring his favorite Spanish wine. This divine beverage was brought to him directly from the homeland of flamenco and bullfighting. The wine was tart and moderately sweet, and the banker did not recognize any other. Will you have a drink? He offered. Whore, Maria waved her hand. It's a sin not to drink to such a thing. I think so too. The banker poured wine into glasses, and after they took a sip said, You probably think I've kept you here deliberately. And for what purpose? Maria asked with a chuckle. I don't know, Steve said awkwardly. For example, to take advantage of your helpless state. But you didn't, she continued with a smile. I assure you, I think nothing of the sort. Although, of course, there are questions. Well, I'm ready to answer them. Where do we start? Well, preferably first. There's not much to tell, Steve sighed. During a morning walk, I found you on the side of the road, apparently hit by a car and like a decent man called an ambulance, and called me your spouse. It was an accident. I didn't have my cell phone with me, so I had to stop at the first car I saw and borrow a cell phone. But you should have seen the way he looked at me, Steve grinned, like a maniac. Maria laughed, and the banker, who also could not help laughing, summarized. Well, I had to improvise, said. Had a fight with my wife. I went to look for her, and here. Well, and in the hospital, just repeated. You got into character, Maria giggled. Steve looked at her and noted that he had never seen Maria in such a playful mood. And that was because she was truly happy right now. So maybe now was a good time to confess her feelings. No, Maria, that's not why, Steve replied seriously. If I hadn't said that, they wouldn't have let me come to you. And you and I wouldn't be sitting here right now. And you would never have known that Maria, I love you. Steve, don't say anything. I know it's a surprise to you, but I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes. I realize now that I've loved you from the first moment I met you, and I'll never give you up. So don't expect to get rid of me. I'm willing to wait until I'm old. It's not just that, Maria said with a sigh. Steve, I'm just an ordinary woman. An average single mom from the country. I don't hang out in nightclubs and hookah lounges. I don't drive expensive foreign cars, and I don't get my eyelashes and nails done every 2 weeks. In general, I live the life of an ordinary woman, concerned about how to feed, clothe, and pack a child for school. And that's fine. Steve summed it up. I've already seen these women who love clubs, hookah lounges, and everything that can be built up. All tuning, and there is no beauty. Not on the outside, not on the inside. You're the real deal. I'd forgotten there were girls like you. Maria listened to Steve, and she really wanted to believe that he spoke sincerely. After all, she liked Steve too. But she had been burned too badly. No matter what the neighbors said about her supposedly wildlife in the city, there was only one man in Maria's life: Elizabeth's father, a biker with movie star looks and, as it turned out, a rotten soul. And how beautifully it all began. Rides on the highway at cosmic speeds, which took your breath away. A luxurious bouquet of roses in the window of the dormitory with a crane, and not for his birthday, but just like that, without reason. Flashy nightclubs, and not freezing. Flashy nightclubs and words. I promised you nothing as soon as Maria informed him of the pregnancy. More wine? Steve's voice came through the veil. Steve saw how embarrassed and tense Maria was and hurried to defuse the situation. No, thanks. She shook her head and added with a smile, I've had enough. I'm not used to alcohol. That's okay, Steve said cheerfully. I'll teach you bad habits. Steve, what about my mom? Maria remembered and felt ashamed. With excitement, she had forgotten all about her mother, and Steve told her about the meeting with Veronica and Elizabeth. Maria cried, poor little things. How hard it had been for them all that time. They didn't have a good life selling pickles on the road. It's not safe. There's a lot of idiots out there. Now Steve was ashamed of himself. He had actually deprived a child of a mother and a poor old woman of a daughter's help. The banker imagined what they had endured during those 6 months and hated himself. Idiot, thought Steve. I couldn't think of anything else to do in 6 months except a lousy post. It was my fault, Steve repented. I could have hired a private detective, but to be honest, it only occurred to me this night when you told me your dream. But all I did was put the post on social media. You asshole. Now Maria understood why she wasn't satisfied with the version that Steve had only managed to track down Mom and Elizabeth today. Of course she had. A man of his position could have hired a private detective or used the connections that the banker probably had, although the post was also an option. It just depended on the people. And what? Maria asked. Did anyone respond to the post? No, he waved his hands. Well, except that someone commented, say, recently looked for a similar woman. No one had seen me, Maria shrugged. Here, unlike in our village, no one cares about anyone. That's how things got so quiet. That's how things got so quiet. And it's probably what Mom was looking for. And she, like you, thought the post was a worthwhile idea. Yeah, Steve chuckled. Well, do you remember what happened to you? Oh, nothing much really. That day, when Steve celebrated in the restaurant a meeting of classmates in the Center for Psychological Help, where Maria worked, arrived important guests from the regional center. The meeting dragged on, and, in addition, she had some paperwork to do. Not only that Maria had to wait for a cab for more than 40 minutes, but it also broke down right in the middle of the highway. What should I do? The young woman asked the cab driver in a low voice. I'll try to fix it. The driver shrugged his shoulders and began to examine his iron horse. It was getting dark outside, and Maria wondered how long they would be here. Ah, we've arrived, the cab driver replied nonchalantly. How do you mean? The passenger was taken aback. And like this. The belt broke. Now I call a tow truck and foot, but maybe there is a possibility to replace it with another car. Confused, asked Maria. This is on Saturday. The driver grinned crookedly. So you can wait for this other car until morning. Catch a hitchhiker. I can't offer anything else. What the hell? She was indignant. What did I pay money for? Money, grumbled the man. I'll give you your money back. Half. You're halfway there. Maria didn't mind, though in fairness she should have demanded all the money. Was the car's malfunction her problem? And there's no telling how long she'd spend on this highway. God forbid they mistake her for a member of the ancient profession. So the neighbors out judging. The wrecker took away the broken car, and Maria has nothing left but to cuckoo chat on the highway. And then she heard a characteristic noise from behind, loud music, and rapidly flew up. and silence. Most likely the driver was drunk, Maria suggested. I was standing on the side of the road, and it seems, the road was not enough. They talked until 2 o'clock in the morning, when Steve realized he had to work tomorrow. Good night, the young woman smiled. I'm going to go enjoy being a mom, catching up on my reading. You're a lucky man, said the banker. Quite like Elizabeth recently. Can't complain. Maria? Steve called out to her as she came up the stairs. Yes? The guest turned around. But you're not saying no to me, are you? Asked Steve. No, replied Maria quietly. I don't say no. The young woman entered the bedroom and smiled happily. Elizabeth was sleeping on the double bed with her dark curls spread on the pillow. The girl smiled in her sleep, and the happy mother looked at her for a long time. And tomorrow I will see my mother, Maria thought. I'll give her a big, big hug. This Steve is like a guardian angel for our family. First, he didn't leave me to die on the side of the road. Then he saved Mom and Elizabeth, miracles indeed. With these happy thoughts, Elizabeth fell asleep. For the first time in the last 6 months, she slept so soundly and serenely. Veronica woke up in high spirits. She felt that something good would happen on this day. A young nurse came into the room. Which one of you is Veronica? She asked. I am, said the older woman. There's someone here to see you. The nurse left, and Elizabeth ran into the room. She was followed by the man who had brought her to the hospital. Hello, he smiled. Well, how is your leg? Already better, replied Veronica gratefully. I will refrain from dancing for now, but I'm trying to walk. Well, if you're joking, then all is well. Grandma and we have a surprise, smiled mysteriously Elizabeth. What kind of surprise? The granddaughter went out into the corridor and returned accompanied by Maria. Maria, exclaimed Veronica. Mama. Maria rushed to her mother and sobbed in her voice. But how could it be? Through her tears, her mother asked. What happened to you, Maria? Where have you been? Noticing that they were being watched with interest by 2 neighbors in the ward, Maria said, Oh, you can't tell me at once. It's long, well, and I'd like it without strangers. Can we go out into the corridor? Veronica suggested. Can you do that? Her daughter asked anxiously. Well, somehow. The old woman was anxious to know what had happened to her daughter. Maria and Steve helped Veronica Ivanovna out. They sat down in the chairs, and the trio told her everything. You, Steve, are like a guardian angel. The older woman voiced her daughter's recent thoughts. Maybe. Steve replied, But I'm not an angel. I'm just an ordinary man. But I'd still like to be a close friend to your family. Steve looked meaningfully at Maria, and Veronica understood at once. So we do not need angels, laughed the woman. But I wouldn't mind a good, kind, and reliable husband for my daughter. Mom? What, Mom? Mom will not advise badly. All you have to do is to be happier than I am. Try it. Once you're unlucky, life doesn't end there. So you don't mind? Steve's happy. I've given you my blessing, Veronica said authoritatively. I don't mind either, said Elizabeth. They're conspiring, Maria gasped. We didn't even think about it, said her mother. But of course, the decision is yours, and I'll take it and agree. And you will not regret, quietly said the banker, kissing her on the temple. Steve's parents, his new bride, his future mother-in-law and stepdaughter, Harry's family, and the kindest Betty celebrated New Year's Eve. Oh, girls, I'm so happy for you, she said, when she heard about the changes in Veronica's family. And the groom is good, and a wealthy one, too. Our local ladies will swallow their tongues with envy. That's right, Veronica agreed. But for me, the main thing is my daughter's happiness. Although, of course, it's nice to rub their noses in it. Well, what am I saying? Maria and Isabella were dressing and decorating the salads. Steve said you were very beautiful, Isabella said, and jokingly complained. But it turns out he was lying to us. You're unrealistically beautiful. You say that too, Maria smiled embarrassedly. I'm just ordinary. Well, no, objected her new friend. You are naturally beautiful. Steve chose you for a reason, and he had a choice, you know. Steve always said he wouldn't get married until he met the one he wanted, and now that moment has come. Our Steve is in love like a schoolboy. And you say she's ordinary? Steve, that's great, Harry said admiringly about his friend's future wife, about an hour after the chimes and congratulations of the head of state. After my Isabella, of course. For the sake of such beauty, it was worth the wait. Although some people have expressed the idea that the bride is as ugly as sin, so you've been hiding her from everyone. Let me guess who expressed such a thought, laughed Steve. Was it the incomparable Jessica? That's her, Harry confirmed. Apparently, she'd been hoping to be Steve's mistress until the last moment. The banker summarized, and friends laughed. The young banker's parents were also delighted with their future daughter-in-law. She's nice, Louise approved. And she has a cute little girl. I loved her at first sight, but I hope you'll have children together. Of course we will, assured the son. Look me, Victor said, and having calculated something in his mind, jokingly wagged his finger. So that in the coming year we'll have a boy. Time is patient. Yes, Steve saluted cheerfully. Do you like soap operas? Louise asked the future relative sternly. I love it, Veronica confessed. That's our man, approved the in-law. So we'll watch soap operas together. So we will, smiled the mother of the bride, not yet fully believing that her daughter will be fine. She wanted to believe that Steve would not hurt the girl. The man seems not bad, but who knows what will happen next. In March, Steve and Maria got married. To the great disappointment of socialites, the famous banker decided not to make a spectacle of their marriage for the bohemondom. Future spouses invited relatives, some of their friends and classmates and colleagues. Both were assured that happiness loves silence, and all the lionesses, tigresses let elsewhere walk their hats and dresses. As a wedding gift, the banker presented Maria some papers decorated with a pink ribbon. What is it? She asked, puzzled. And this, my dear, the founding documents for the beauty salon, the owner of which you are now. Me? Maria exclaimed, stunned. What kind of beauty salon owner am I? Well, you're no worse than anyone else, Steve remarked. Take the young wife of the CEO of a new construction company. All she's got is legs from her ears and fake blonde curls, but she runs a boutique. She's as smart as a canary, and yet there she is. That's encouraging. Exactly, he encouraged her. So, Maria, be brave. Everything will work out for you. Well, and then do not forget about my humble person. You know I'll always help. I know, with a happy smile, nodded without 5 minutes, wife. Well, and now my wedding present. I hope you like it. Maria took out an oblong velvet case from her purse and held it out to Steve. And what is this? Better. When Steve opened the case, he raised his eyebrows in bewilderment. But when he realized what it was, he grabbed his fiancée and started circling the room. In the case was a pregnancy test, showing 2 stripes. This really is more precious than gold and diamonds combined, the banker whispered, kissing Maria. When he heard a car pull up to the house, he said, Here comes our limousine. Well, let's go towards happiness. Yes, onward and onward to happiness. Happiness didn't last long. 2 years after the couple had a son, Tom, they moved into a new 2-story mansion with a swimming pool and many buildings from the security room to the movie room. It was an entire residence. Seeing a picture of the house on the internet, Steve was immediately interested and the same day arranged a meeting with the realtor. And when the banker came to see the house, he noted that in reality, it is even more beautiful than on the photo. The mansion, located on the other side of the city, was a gift to his beloved wife, to the 3rd wedding anniversary. Sometime after the move, Maria again pleased her husband with the news of an addition to the family. The couple had a daughter, Karina. To even the score is not enough one more guy, said Steve. Well, what a year. Veronica moved into the old house after much persuasion. "What am I going to do here alone in such a huge house?" the old lady said. "Mom, well, at least in your old age you will live normally," said Maria. "Well, what keeps you in this extinct village? Insane neighbors, and here you'll receive grandchildren, garden, and cultivate a vegetable garden. If you want, you can take Aunt Betty with you. After Uncle Tony's funeral, she still can't get over it. And the kids are far away." "That's true," Veronica sighed. "They were so loving. I was always envious of them. Besides, she'd done so much for us once." Betty gladly accepted her friend's invitation, and from then on they lived together. The older women gardened, baked pies, and sold them to the catering companies. "You're good, of course, but why beat your legs when we have Harry?" Steve said one day. "Bake your own pies and donuts, and Harry's driver will take them to the restaurant." The energetic old ladies signed a contract with Harry's, and their business took off. A year later, the ladies of venerable age were awarded a diploma for contribution to business development. Banker Steve decided to try himself in a new field, and having sold the bank, created a logistics company from scratch. Maria successfully managed a beauty salon and was thinking about a branch. "And you said, 'I cannot,'" teased her husband. "You are my modesty." Elizabeth enjoyed babysitting Small, as she called Tom and Karina, and still dreamed of a career as a female banker. Steve was flattered. After all, it was his stepdaughter who had made the decision. Steve was sure that this girl would succeed. The 18th birthday of his eldest daughter was celebrated with a big bash. "Our Elizabeth deserves no other," said the stepfather, and the parents began to prepare for the celebration of adulthood. From early morning, the servants worked so hard that a beehive would be jealous. They licked the mansion and grounds, polished the best dishes, took the tables and chairs out into the yard. When balloons and flowers were brought, the servants hustled even more actively. The celebrant went to the beauty parlor. A stunning dress sewn to order hung in the closet and waited for its time. Tom and Karina were on vacation, and now the brother and sister were merrily running around the grounds, making a mess and disturbing the servants. This year, Elizabeth had successfully completed her first year at the Institute of Commerce and Law, where her stepfather had studied. She, as Steve once did, never changed her decision. The girl chose the Department of Banking and went to her dream. "I want a red diploma," Elizabeth said decisively after the summer session. "So what's the problem?" encouragingly smiled stepfather. By the way, the girl never considered Steve a stepfather. He became a father to Elizabeth on that memorable day when he picked them up with her grandmother on the highway in a snowstorm. Yes, and Steve called Elizabeth his daughter, then made a lot of noise in the business community. In the internet and yellow publications appeared notes about the illegitimate daughter of the banker Steve. At first, Steve was discouraged, but then he laughed merrily. Well, so what? It's not like they were lying. Elizabeth really is my daughter. And anyway, I don't care what they write. The gossip columnists want to eat too. The first to arrive were the elderly businesswomen. The ladies arrived in a miniature foreign car, driven by Veronica. "I hope they'll let me spend the night," the old lady asked with feigned strictness, and winked at her daughter and son-in-law. "In honor of the first granddaughter's coming of age, I intend to drink thoroughly." "No problem," smiled son-in-law. "Where's the birthday girl?" Betty asked. "And the birthday girl is preparing to present herself to the guests in all her glory," Maria proudly explained. The Harry family had arrived by cab. Their only offspring, Jacob, was the young man of the birthday girl. Upon learning about it, the parents of the boy and the girl came to the delight. "I never dreamed of a better girl for my son," said Isabella. "Well," chuckled Harry, "what are their years? They're still learning, getting back on their feet. But I'd be delighted if Elizabeth were to become our daughter-in-law." "Yes," she said dreamily. It would be great if they went all the way together. Let's hope for the best, the businessman concluded. Jacob was holding a huge bouquet of roses and a branded package. "Where's Elizabeth?" he asked after the greetings. "Patience, only patience, young man," said the prospective mother-in-law cheerfully. "Her Highness is preparing for a solemn exit and asks not to be disturbed." People were pulling up. The courtyard was filling up with relatives, friends, classmates from the new school, and fellow students. And then the music played and the birthday girl came out of the mansion to the applause of the guests. Elizabeth looked like a picture from a fashion magazine. The golden tight dress emphasized her slender, girlish figure and beautifully shaded her fresh, honey-colored skin, dark hair, and eye. A waterfall of brown hair flowed spectacularly down her back, shimmering in the sunset rays. And a small tiara completed the festive image. "Well, just like a princess," clapped her hands Veronica. "Queen," objected son-in-law. Jacob came out to meet Elizabeth and, kneeling on one knee, handed her a bouquet which caused a new explosion of applause. The guests presented Elizabeth with gifts, and then everyone enjoyed the meal. After toasts to the celebrant parents and grandparents, the head of the family asked for a moment of attention. "And now the highlight of the festive program," solemnly announced Steve. "Elizabeth, go to the father." The girl obeyed, and her father took out of his pocket a silk scarf and blindfolded her eyes. "What's that for?" Elizabeth said with a laugh. "It's the right thing to do," Steve answered and led her along. "Can I come with you?" my mother-in-law asked. "Nope, you'll see for yourself." "How far are we going?" Elizabeth asked. "No, we're already there. Watch out for the step," Steve warned and picked Elizabeth up in his arms. When Steve set the girl on the floor and removed her blindfold, she couldn't hold back a gasp of amazement. Father and daughter were in the garage, and right in front of them stood a brand new bright red Opel decorated with a giant snow white bow. "Is it for me?" exclaimed the girl in amazement. "Well, since I brought you here, it's for you," laughed Steve, satisfied with the effect. "Please drive." "I'm afraid," Elizabeth protested. "How about you? What are you afraid of, you fool?" "Well, you've been to driving school, haven't you?" "I did. And if I get behind the wheel now, the triumph will be incomplete, don't you agree? Anyway, don't argue with your father. Get in." "I'm so nervous," my daughter confessed. "Don't be afraid. I'm with you." Seeing the culprit behind the wheel of a beautiful car, the guests again began to applaud. "Welcome to the ranks of car ladies," shouted Alice, Elizaveta's institute friend. "Well done, Elizabeth," Jacob exclaimed. "Darling, I'm proud of you." Elizabeth got out of the car, bowed to the guests, and took her seat next to her boyfriend. After they had eaten, the guests wanted to dance and have fun. Steve and Maria stood embraced and looked at the summer starry sky with a smile, decorated with colorful lights. "We have raised great kids, right?" Steve said quietly, watching the beautiful birthday girl and Tom and Karina dancing dashingly among the young people. "I agree, but that's not all," replied his wife cryptically. "Well, of course not all," he agreed. "Tom and Karinka are still, in fact, small, and Elizabeth is still learning." "That's true, but that's not what I mean." "What is it?" Steve asked, puzzled. "Oh, I don't know how to say it." "Well, you'd better say it somehow now that you've started." "Well, Steve, I'm pregnant," Maria blurted out. "Wow, that's a surprise." "Aren't you happy?" she asked sadly. "I realize I'm not young anymore, but it just happened." "Young?" Steve exclaimed. "You'll be young to me when you're 90 years old and shuffling around on a gurney? Bah! What a horrible prospect." Maria shuddered, and unable to bear it, laughed till she cried. "And what will you be like then?" "Also on a gurney, holding his stomach cheerfully," said his husband. Elizabeth and Jacob came up to them. "What's the occasion?" the daughter asked. "My father and I imagined ourselves at 90, Maria said. wiping away her tears. And you? Tom and Karina will have a brother or sister, Steve added. Elizabeth looked at her mother incredulously. Mom? Is it true? It's true, Elizabeth, Maria nodded. That's great, exclaimed the girl, hugging her parents. This is news. I will practice on a brother or sister. Let's go to the table. This calls for a drink. Come, Karina. Steve looked at the beautiful girl and remembered the little girl begging for help. That December day. Everything in this life is connected, he thought. Steve realized he hadn't discovered America, but he knew. It never hurts to make sure of it once again. After all, it means that a person lives. Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.